who is an entrepreneur? Are they made? Are they born? Can anybody be an entrepreneur? What are the barriers? One of the things you point out that it's certainly not college. Most of the people who start businesses didn't even go to college. And so what is that thing we call the entrepreneur?
Well, I got like three answers. The first is most entrepreneurs who start their businesses, if it's not a franchise, right? If you ask them, it's amazing how consistent the answer is. They were surprised. They surprised themselves that they're an entrepreneur because they were working in early middle age. They're working in a factory. They saw how something could have been done better. Maybe they've talked to their boss in the company about these improvements. You know, companies don't like to make changes in things. So these are guys who left. There's a huge amount of people who basically are called spin-out entrepreneurs in my book.
Well, is not that how Sam Walton started Walmart? He was working with Woolworth or one of the other big chains and said, look, I've got an idea that we can serve these rural communities with low-cost goods and it'll be a real winner. And they said, no, that's not our business. I mean, you've been looking at this for a long time. Is there a single characteristic of a person that decides I'm going to be an entrepreneur, or is it a mosaic?
Yeah, it's a mosaic. I never found it. You know, there are a lot of professors who say, "Oh, I can smell them." Right? It's their personality. They're great salespeople. They're, you know, I've known thousands at this point in my life. If you run the Kauffman Foundation, it's a constant parade, and some extremely successful. I have people in mind who have the mousiest personalities, and they run huge international companies. Yeah. Right? Other people are boisterous. Right? They're, you know, some people say, well, most of them get divorced. There's just no statistics on this. There's all this sort of mythology about it. And I think, you know, one of the things that I do see constantly is people who were surprised, right, as I was when I first started my first business, right? Other people have an aspiration to work for themselves. Yeah. In some cases, they got to settle a score. That's the case with Mr. Kauffman, okay? He was tremendously successful as a salesman. And 2 years in a row, the guy who owned the company cut his sales territory because he made more under the commission formula than the president of the company. And the second time he did it, Mr. Kauffman said, I quit, and went out and figured out how to start a business because he had these words in his head: I will never work for somebody else in my life.
Well, that happened to Walt Disney. Walt Disney created a cartoon character, Oswald the something. Yeah. I can't remember what the creature was. Very successful, and his syndicator was in New York.
Yeah.
And he traveled to New York expecting to cut a new contract, and the distributor said, well, I've decided it's so successful, you don't need to make as much money, so I'm going to cut you by 80%.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he said, okay. I'm going to get on the train, I'm going to go back to California, and by the time I'm in California, I'm going to have a new creature, and that new creature was Mickey Mouse.
So we could put Walt Disney, who's also from Kansas City, and Louis Kaufman from Kansas City in the same box. You know, I'm going to settle a score, right?
Yeah, yeah.
What they're really saying is, A, I have a lot of confidence in my idea to do something. Second, the best boss I'm ever going to have is me, okay? And somehow in there is the third thing that people often fixate on, but you can't measure it. And that is, those two forces are such that they're ready to take a risk, okay? And bet on themselves, okay? That they could somehow feed the family for a couple of years and go to town and make a company. And if there's something that's elusive, that seems to be a part of entrepreneurs, okay? But it's not everybody. You know, everybody says, well, Mark Zuckerberg, his parents, look at Bill Gates. His father's very successful. These are not folks who, if they stumbled, they were going to be on welfare.
Well, it strikes me there may be another attribute at work, which is, you point out, the entrepreneur's journey is essentially that of self-education.
Yes.
And that we'll get into the business plan or the need for or not. But it's essentially, you get into a business and it's a discovery procedure where you're learning about yourself and you're learning about what works and what doesn't work. And you also talk about something in the book called the OODA loop, which
Yeah.
is where I guess it was initiated to great deal with fighter pilots
Yeah.
in the Korean War. And, an entrepreneur never really knows, but you're trying to discover all the time what works. And that's an attribute. And I think most successful entrepreneurs share that attribute, whether they're tall, short, fat, small,
Right.
black, white, or brown.
That's right. Well, the essence of the book is distilled into one sentence, and it came from Ewing Kaufman, and I repeat it again and again, and that is, the only way to learn how to be an entrepreneur is to start a business.
Right.
And the point you were making is, in the course of starting that business, you begin to teach yourself a huge amount about yourself, as well as learn an entirely new business. At the moment, I happen to be at J Labs in New York City, looking at a company in which
J Labs is Johnson & Johnson?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an accelerator that they run here in New York, and they have 4 or 5 other installations around the country. And I'm here visiting with a fabulous entrepreneur in whom I have a small investment. And this is really the 3rd iteration of her company. I've been in this company as an investor probably 7 or 8 years. She had to reinvent it once, reinvent it twice, and now she's on a trailblazing path to growth. But as an investor, I learned a lot one more time that, first of all, businesses aren't great successes in 1 or 2 years like college professors like to tell kids.
Yeah.
The average, as I say in my book, it's statistical, it's empirical. It's going to take you 7 or 8 years before you actually know whether or not the business is going to survive. And when we think about these unicorns and stuff, if you actually look at the average time from the start to the day investors and the public would invest in them, if they go public, it's like 13 years.